Okay, welcome to the webinar today, The Value of Energy Efficiency for Industrial and Warehouse Buildings. I'm Tad Radzinski and I'll be leading the webinar. I want to thank everybody for joining, and before we do get started, just a few logistics. We will be running through the presentation in its entirety, and then we'll be taking questions and answers following the presentation. The way you can ask questions is on the dialog box on the GoToWebinar control panel. You have a question box that you can basically type your questions right into. We'll then review those and respond to them after the webinar. If you do have any difficulties with anything on the webinar, whether you can't hear well or you're having other issues, you can actually type that into either the question box or the chat box, and we have someone monitoring that and they'll help you with that. We are looking forward to conducting this webinar today, and with that I'm going to introduce Marla, who's going to get things started here.
All right, thank you so much. Hello everyone, I'm Marla Thalheimer, Director of Sustainability for Liberty Property Trust, and I'd like to welcome you today. We are really happy that you've joined us for this free webinar. This is something new that we're trying for our tenants, so we'd love to have your feedback so we know whether it's something we should do more of in the future. Just wanted to make sure that you understood that our intent today is really just to provide you with helpful information. You know, we may be your landlord, but we're certainly not trying to tell you how to run your business. We just really want to provide a good value to you as your landlord and give you access to good information that can help you save energy and save money. Everybody likes to save money, especially these days, so we're hoping that that's you know, a good end result. And we really just want to give you some ideas that you could potentially implement according to your lease structure, particularly if you're in a flex or industrial warehouse building. If you have any questions as to what you can do and what your lease allows, you can certainly reach out to your Liberty Property Manager, and you know, they will you know, definitely help you with that, but we'd be open and more than willing to have those conversations with you. We have an expert in the field that has designed this presentation specifically for you, and he's going to provide, again, information and ideas on the what, how, and why of saving energy in your buildings. And we also have a drawing for a free energy audit, which Tad's going to tell you about in just a minute. It's really a great pleasure to introduce you to Tad Radzinski from Sustainable Solutions as our presenter today. I've known Tad for a few years now, and he's really an expert in so many facets of sustainability, and he really just has so much experience, which I'm going to let him tell you about, but it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Tad Radzinski.
Okay. Marla, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here today. As Marla mentioned, we are having a drawing for a free energy audit, and for the folks that are on the call and are on the webinar here, in order for you to qualify for that audit, you know, to be entered in the drawing, you do need to stay on for the entire session. We will have the drawing at the end, so we will be announcing the winner on the webinar, and that way everybody will know who is the lucky winner today. So please hang on through the question and answer, and right after the question and answer session we'll draw the name of the winning participant who will get the free energy audit at their facility. As Marla mentioned, I have been working in the sustainability field for a long time, and have a great deal of experience working in many different types of buildings. Started my business in 2001, Sustainable Solutions, and the focus at that time was really just on making buildings more sustainable, whether it was through new construction or improving the operations of existing buildings. I'm a registered professional engineer, and I have conducted well over 150 energy audits in my time. I've also been working in buildings. I was a system manager at a nuclear facility. I worked for the electric utility and had a great deal of experience on how buildings operate. I do know that many of you on the phone are responsible for managing buildings, or you're the engineers within these different buildings. And the average person really doesn't realize that there's a lot of complexity to managing a building. There's a lot of different aspects and systems you have to worry about. So we'll definitely be talking about that as we go through this. We have been very successful over the years of getting buildings improving their performance and really reducing operating costs. We've been very successful at getting Energy Star certifications and also LEED certifications in the building. So as we go through this, I'll talk about that. And last but not least, I am a professor at Villanova University. I actually helped develop the master's degree program in sustainable engineering, and I teach 3 or 4 different courses in that program, and one of them is focused on building operations. So we'll definitely bring that experience out as we go through this. I see a number of people have joined since I first made the announcement, but for those that you just got on, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, so save those as we go through this, and you can ask those questions through the dialog box on your GoToWebinar screen. So what we're going to talk about today are a number of things. First thing we want to understand is what are sustainable buildings and operations. We hear the word sustainable all the time, but what does it really mean to everyone here that's worried about managing a building, the day-to-day operations, handling the maintenance, the utilities, the complaints. I know there's a lot of things that happen within buildings where people are not comfortable. Whether your building's a full warehouse or a light industrial, you're still going to have office areas, and you're going to have other areas where employee and occupant comfort are very important. Another thing we'll talk about are energy audits and the importance of benchmarking. It's really very critical to understand how a building's performing in order to make some good decisions on how to improve that performance. We'll then be looking at different energy efficiency opportunities within buildings. We'll talk about how to go beyond just energy efficiency, a few initiatives that can be done, including water savings and other aspects that can be integrated that are very low cost and easy to implement to reduce costs. We have a case study, and then we're going to talk about the Liberty Partnership Program. So what are sustainable buildings? Like I said earlier, it is a term we hear all the time. We hear sustainable this, sustainable that, and what really is it? Well, if you think about it, all of you are involved in different organizations, and I would assume that most of you are involved in organizations that are in business to make a profit. So from a sustainability perspective, it's really important to focus on economic, environmental, and social performance, and make that very particular for your particular company or operation, and really understand what the importance is of those different things as you operate your building. So we're going to talk about all the various aspects that are involved in managing a building. You have to think about the water, the energy that's used, occupant comfort, cleaning, maintenance. There's so many aspects that are important to consider. And when we look at sustainable buildings and operations, we have to think of that in a holistic manner and really consider the fact that a building is a system, and there's a lot of different aspects of that building that interrelate and affect each other and have to be considered when you're developing an operations plan to improve the performance of the building. When you are working on these buildings, it really is important to know that how the building operates is definitely going to affect occupant health, comfort, and productivity, all very important aspects. Building operations have a major impact on energy usage, water consumption, also the carbon footprint of the building. So these things all have to be considered, and we know for a fact, having worked in hundreds of buildings over the years, that pretty much any building we work in, there's always opportunities for improvement. There's always opportunities to save energy, and we found that many of these opportunities can be result in anywhere from 5 to 20% energy cost savings, with usually minimal capital investment for that. When we think about the benefits of sustainable buildings and operations, number one is obviously reducing operating costs, saving money on the electric bill, the water bill, but improved employee health and productivity is really important, because if you're working in a situation where you're managing a warehouse and you have employees running around there, or even if you have an industrial building with an office attached to it, the comfort and well-being of those employees is really important. And there's major studies that have been done that basically demonstrate that occupant comfort will definitely affect productivity. So making these buildings as comfortable as possible and as efficient as possible is really important. We also know that there's going to be opportunities to improve equipment life, to get better control over the building operations, And then for some of you, you may have a situation where you're actually, maybe your company has a sustainability initiative or sustainability program, and some of the things you do within your buildings and operations can actually become marketing opportunities for you or your company. You often see of different organizations saying that they have either LEED certified buildings, or their buildings are certified to Energy Star, or they've reduced their energy consumption, which is reduce the company's carbon footprint. All good marketing opportunities for you. Number one, we know that buildings and operations definitely impact our bottom line. Everybody on the phone here and on this webinar has felt the effects of operating a building, whether you're managing a large warehouse, light industrial building or office, or you're just managing your own home. We all pay electric bills, we all pay water bills. So we know that the bottom line is really, affected by how we operate the building. And, if we're not efficient with the use of energy, not efficient with the use of water, we feel that every time we pay the bill every month or every quarter when we're paying that bill. It's also important to note that not only is it money that we have to worry about, but a building, like I said, is a system. So if you look at this diagram I've got here, really you can look at the building and then you can look at all the inputs and outputs. And there's a lot of things that come in here well beyond just energy. You've got money coming in, you've got people, you've got food and beverages, vehicles. If you're a warehouse space, you've got truck traffic all the time. And then there's a lot of things that come out. There's going to be obviously jobs. By having this building, you're employing people. But we'll also see things like noise or combustion products if you're burning anything. So different things to consider as you evaluate the performance of a building. I also know from the work we've been doing over the years with buildings that, if you add it up across the United States, building operations alone are responsible for more than 12% of total water consumption in the United States, 71% of electricity consumption. That's pretty surprising, when you think about it. But buildings, there's a lot of energy that goes into running the HVAC systems, lighting. If any of you are managing refrigerated warehouses or something like that, a lot of energy consumption for the refrigeration system. Buildings are also responsible for about 65% of the waste that's generated in the U.S. and about 39% of the carbon emissions that come out of burning the electricity, producing electricity or burning fossil fuels. So again, a lot of impact, and a lot of folks aren't aware of that, and we almost take it for granted. And as we're working, we don't think about the impacts that are occurring on a big scale from the operation of these buildings. Next thing I want to talk about is energy audits and the importance of benchmarking. Understanding that energy performance is very important. And I know just about everybody on this phone, like I said earlier, probably pays some electric bill, whether it's for your place of business or where you live. But the question I always ask people is, how many people can actually say they know how many kilowatt hours or how much natural gas they consume in their building, whether it's their home or their place of business, in a month? And generally, most people don't have a clue. They know they pay the bill. They might say, oh, well, I pay $300 a month, or I pay $10,000 a month for my electric bill. But how many kilowatt hours is that equivalent to? So most people don't realize that. We get the bill, we pay it. But if you look here, we do get utility bills. This is an example of a utility bill from our office. And basically, there's very good information on here. It tells us how much gas we use, how many kilowatt hours were used in the month, how many kilowatts of demand were generated. And then there's all the information about the cost. But measuring and trending the consumption and cost of our energy, our water, wastewater, waste going out of the buildings is really important. Bottom line is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And I have some children, and some of them are young adults now, and they don't do a very good job of managing their checkbooks. And it's really important when you're, even looking at your own money. If you're not managing it, you're going to have problems. It's the same thing with managing electricity or managing energy in a building. If you're not sure how much is being consumed, you can't do much to change that. So we typically set up measurement systems using simple spreadsheets to understand electricity, natural gas, water, utilities, other things. And then by looking at that and doing trending, you have the ability to understand how energy is being consumed in a building. For those of you that are located in these various cities that are on this table right here, there's actually requirements now, there's laws that are coming into effect that various building owners or managers have to report the energy consumption of their buildings. And it's typically set up based on the size of the building. But since our focus today is on industrial and warehouse buildings, I would imagine many of you will be well over the 10,000 or 50,000 square foot limit that you see on this table. But if you look here, Philadelphia, for example, is now rolling out an energy disclosure bill, which is going to require any building over 50,000 square feet will have to report its energy consumption. And that will be first submitted to the city for their review, but then year 2, that information is going to be made publicly available. So what that means is people will be able to look at and understand how much energy is being consumed in buildings. And for anybody that's looking to rent space, it's a really great tool because it'll allow you to basically get an understanding of the energy consumption of that building and compare multiple buildings and have a good idea of what your future operating costs could be. So again, just be aware if you're in any of these states here, Massachusetts, state of California is actually doing it. Washington, D.C., New York City's had local law 84 now for a couple years, and there's been a lot of activity there. So you are required by law to report this information, and it is a major driver. This diagram that we put together shows how a benchmarking process should work. And basically, we would start out with initial benchmarking of a building. And the tool that we typically use is called Portfolio Manager. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But Portfolio Manager is a software tool, and you enter information about the building. You enter the utility bills, number of occupants, size of the building, the types of the building, and that kind of thing. And then it will give you a score between 0 and 100. And based on that score, any building that gets a score of 75 or greater qualifies to be an Energy Star certified building. Any building that gets a 69 or greater will qualify for the United States Green Building Council Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or LEED, rating system for certification in the existing buildings and operations and maintenance program. So benchmarking allows us to, number one, understand how a building's performing. We can develop an energy utilization index from that. And then ideally what you want to do is once you benchmark 1 year, you want to do continuous benchmarking. So every year you're measuring your energy performance, and then that allows you to do various things. First of all, you understand your performance. You can then maybe move into a more detailed energy audit, an ASHRAE level 2, where you're analyzing the building and looking for opportunities to maybe upgrade equipment or change lighting or different things like that. Or you can just establish a sustainable operations program where you develop a program or policies and procedures on how you manage energy, how you use water for exterior management, maybe for green cleaning. And then some people can even decide to pursue LEED certification once they understand the operation of their building. So again, a holistic approach to understanding building performance. And the great thing about benchmarking is it really allows you to use data to understand not only the building performance, but the costs that you're incurring. It also gives you the ability to monitor progress over time. Let's say, for example, you measure your electricity consumption in the building and you have a goal to reduce that by 10 or 15%. By having that initial benchmark data, you can definitely do that. Energy monitoring technology is pretty advanced now as well, and it does allow for benchmarking using a building automation system or a computer system, or submeters can be installed, or data loggers. There's a lot of different ways to measure the energy performance of a building. I mentioned earlier the Portfolio Manager program. Portfolio Manager is a program that does apply to warehouse buildings. So anybody on the phone that does have a warehouse building, this is a perfect program for you because you can enter the data in there and it will give you the score that I mentioned. And basically that score, there's an algorithm that's run through this Portfolio Manager program that allows, based on the building size, the space type, the use, number of occupants, and that kind of thing, to kind of compare your performance to other similar buildings in that space type. mentioned earlier, 75 is required for Energy Star certification, and 69 is required for the LEED existing buildings certification. This tool can also be used if any of you are on the phone and your building is not a warehouse or primary use of that function for industrial spaces. Let's say you're doing light manufacturing or some type of refrigerated warehouse or something like that, then you can still use the tool and it will give you a energy utilization index, but it will not provide a score because it doesn't have the ability to do compare to other buildings. This tool is being upgraded by EPA, and there will be a new version coming out in about 2 weeks. So there will be more space types covered, and again, it is a very valuable and efficient tool for doing this. The great thing is once you start doing annual benchmarking, you really can understand what expected energy performance should be in your building, and then you can look for any kind of issues. If you do see a spike in energy consumption, it can help you to ask the questions of what's going on. And then it also is really valuable if, as you're monitoring, let's say, for example, you benchmark your building and your score is only a 60, and you do some energy improvements within the building and the score moves up to, say, a 69 or a 75, then once it hits that level, it'll allow you to go for either Energy Star or LEED certification if that's something that's of interest to you. It's really important also when you're benchmarking energy performance in the building is to understand your energy consumption over time. So we typically look at least 1 year, and we also look at the time of year when the energy is being consumed. As you can see here, this was done with simple spreadsheets and basically building a graph. And by looking at utility data only, we were able to build a graphic and get an idea where energy was being used at what months. And as you can see in this particular building, in this climate zone, the energy did spike in June, July, August, September timeframe, and that was because there was cooling within this building. So the HVAC system was being operated, the air conditioning was on, and there was a spike in energy consumption. You can see in the winter, energy consumption was lower, and that could be attributed to the fact that you weren't running the HVAC, and maybe this building was heated with natural gas or something like that, and electricity was fairly low, and you're primarily picking up a lighting load and computers and things like that. But again, important to look at that data, look at it across a long time period. For any of you that are on the phone that have a building automation system, this capability is most likely built into the BAS. I also know Liberty does a great job of benchmarking a lot of their buildings, and they'll be available to help with that, and Marla will be talking about that a little later. So now let's talk a little bit about energy efficiency in existing buildings. I can tell you it's very easy to save money by reducing energy consumption with the right focus, and it's a lot easier to save energy than to pay for more. Basically, we know that energy costs continue to increase. We see electric utility rates increasing. The cost of fuels is fluctuates all the time. If you're using oil, very high price for that. Natural gas has basically dropped in price, but a lot of volatility in the market, and it's important to really focus on reducing consumption of energy as much as possible. Bottom line, again, why should we even reduce energy use? Well, number one, it's to save money. That's extremely important, but it's also, as you can see here in this graph, this is an example of a building we worked on a while ago, and when we first benchmarked the building, the Energy Star score was a 62. We did an ASHRAE level 1 audit where we came in and we did the energy efficiency audit, like you have an opportunity to win this audit today by participating in this webinar. Some of the recommendations were implemented, and I can tell you from memory of this building, many of these opportunities were very low and no cost, which were implemented over time. You can see a steady decrease in energy consumption here. Eventually, we got to the point where the Energy Star score in that building was at an 85. What that resulted in was a significant reduction in energy savings. There was almost 4 million kilowatt hours a year that were reduced over a 2-year time period. And basically it came out to roughly about $110,000, $122,000 a year in cost savings. Well, actually over 2 years, so roughly $60,000 a year in cost savings for this particular building. So that's really big. But it's also important to note if most people aren't really aware of how impactful or how polluting it is to actually produce electricity in the United States. Having worked in an electric utility for years, I worked in a nuclear plant as well as fossil plants. I'm intimate with how electricity is produced. And actually, the plants that produce electricity are only about 30% efficient. So if you're making electricity by burning coal or natural gas, only about 30% of the energy that goes in comes out as electricity. So that means there's a lot of wasted energy. And by the time the electricity actually gets to your building, the reductions are even greater because of line losses from inefficiencies in our distribution system and things like that. So just, again, when you do save money, you are also helping to reduce the impact on the environment by not using that electricity or the natural gas from the energy you're saving. Energy efficiency is a practice that reduces the use of non-renewable energy forms such as electricity and fossil fuels like oil or natural gas. And it really does reduce operating costs, there's no doubt, but it also can be done without affecting productivity or safety of different individuals working in the buildings. Sometimes people say, oh, well, we don't want to do anything with our lighting because we're afraid it's going to affect productivity or there's going to be safety issues. And there's a lot of technology available today that allows you to make changes without affecting that. I mentioned earlier the environmental impact, and I love this aerial or this satellite photograph that shows time-lapse photograph of the United States at night. You can just see we're a very energy-intensive society. Most of us, don't realize how dependent we are on electricity until we lose power, and then at that time we definitely realize how important it is. Benefits of energy audits include not only improving energy performance, but also providing a roadmap to achieve energy reductions on a system-wide basis. And it's really important to consider that there's utility incentives that also help with implementing these various energy conservation measures that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Incentives can be are very specific, usually to each specific building location. I know here in Philadelphia area, Pico Energy has their Smart Ideas program, and we can actually get many of the people we work for money for upgrading HVAC systems or changing out lights or improving, even changing bulbs. Now there's incentives if you go from a 32 watt down to a 25 or 28 watt fluorescent lamp, there's a payment of $1 per lamp for doing that. So these incentives are important to know about. When we do the energy audit for the folks that are on the phone here, we'll definitely evaluate what utility incentives are available for you. They could be local, they could be utility, they could be state. There's even some federal things to consider. There's a program called Desire, and if you're interested in learning more about what incentives are in your particular area, you can click on that, go to the Desire website, and they'll provide a listing by state or municipality on all the incentives that are in your particular area. So when you do an energy audit, where do you start? You can see here, this is our model. We really start way down here by understanding the energy consumption in the building. Then we look for the low cost and no cost opportunities to implement. Then we'll typically focus on plug loads. That's going to be computers and different things that are plugged into the wall, refrigerators, vending machines, things like that. What can we do to reduce the consumption there? Then we'll look at lighting, typically water heating, HVAC, the building envelope, and then getting into renewable options very last. As you can see here, as you go up this pyramid, the complexity and the cost of integrating energy efficiency gets more difficult. So when you're trying to look at, maybe upgrading an HVAC system could be very expensive and very expensive and complex to do. But if you're looking at low cost and no cost measures, you can do simple things just like changing your operating schedule or using programmable thermostats. Those things typically don't cost much and usually result in big savings. Once you actually achieve some of the savings by doing lower cost measures, you can actually use that money then to do some of the capital improvements within the building. So maybe there's an opportunity to reduce costs by turning some things off or changing schedules, and then that'll allow some of the savings to be used to maybe upgrade lights or buy Energy Star equipment or even look at improving the HVAC system. Since we're talking about warehouse and industrial buildings, there's a number of energy conservation measures. ECM stands for energy conservation measures that we typically focus on. Energy benchmarking I've talked a lot about, so I'm not going to talk about that, but submetering is very important. We're going to talk about retro-commissioning, which is basically coming back and verifying that systems and equipment are performing as they were designed. We're going to talk about optimizing schedules. Unbelievable, that first diagram that I showed you where we took the building from a 62 to an 85, we achieved probably half of that just by adjusting operating schedules in that building. Preventative maintenance is really important, making sure equipment's properly maintained, you have good airflows, your sensors are working right. If you are operating air compressors in your building, it's really important to make sure you don't have air leaks. Various things to look at there. We're going to talk about some lighting upgrades. De-stratification, that's, since we're talking industrial and warehouse buildings, many of you have high bay spaces. And as you know, maybe if you're in a cold climate, a lot of the heat might be up near the ceiling in the winter. De-stratification, there could also be a lot of hot air in the building during the day when it's really hot and humid. De-stratification allows us to move that air around and basically improve performance and comfort in the building. Same thing with ventilation. We'll talk about waste heat recovery. I mentioned earlier, some of you may have boilers or may have air compressors in your properties. There's definitely opportunity there to get waste heat and use that for heating either the building or heating process areas. I would imagine most of you have roll-up doors, and when you open a door and you leave it open, you're actually either leaving a lot of hot or cold air in, or you're basically air conditioning the exterior of the building. So using high-speed roll-up doors is really important. And then energy curtailment is something that you all should be aware of, and I'm going to talk about that. You can do things like reducing peak loads or running a generator, doing some demand response, and the utilities actually pay money to large industrial buildings for doing these things. So we'll go through that in a minute here. I mentioned submetering earlier, and submetering allows us to really understand how energy is used in a building. Ideally we want to know energy in the building, but even better, it's great if we can understand how much energy used for heating, ventilating, and air conditioning the building, for the lighting or the process areas. And submetering, whether it's individual circuits, allows us to really understand that. And we can look at pie charts, and I'll show you an example of that in a little while, but being able to understand where the energy is being used allows you to really effectively establish a good energy efficiency program. You can then trend and log data through either the building automation system or with a spreadsheet. We're actually gearing up to go work in a building in the next week or so, and some of the guys here are going to be taking data logging equipment with them. And just like you see this gentleman looking in the electrical panel, we're going to be hooking up circuit transmitters to several of the circuits, and we're going to data log and get some information on how energy is being used in that building, so we can measure performance of their air handlers and then some of the process areas. Retro-commissioning, like I mentioned earlier, is a process of having a professional coming in, usually engineering company, and they're going to test the equipment that's installed in the building, whether it's HVAC, refrigeration, could be lighting, could be air compressors. They're going to make sure that things are running the way they're supposed to and operating the way they're supposed to. And during that retro-commissioning process, we are typically finding for new buildings, there's a cost to that, but typically has a payback, because even in new buildings, when the equipment's installed, sometimes it's not done properly, and having an independent party evaluating that provides great value. But for all of us on the phone that are talking about existing buildings, retro-commissioning is really effective for that, where you come into an existing building and you basically monitor and evaluate the operation of the various equipment. We just recently worked on a project. It was actually a Liberty building, and the retro-commissioning was conducted, and there was about a 5 to 10% savings in energy achieved just by improving performance. That was actually in an office building. However, in even a warehouse building, you are going to have various HVAC units, office areas, things like that should be evaluated. So there is good benefit to that. I mentioned earlier an ASHRAE level 2. When we do energy audits, there's various levels of those. An ASHRAE level 1 is typically just understanding the building performance and benchmarking it, ASHRAE Level 2 is a much deeper dive into the operation. Typically when we do an initial energy audit, we'll understand how energy is being consumed, and then we'll say, okay, well, it looks like there's going to be some opportunities for lighting here, some opportunities for the HVAC. We do see some waste heat recovery opportunities, and then what we'll do is we'll come in and we'll actually do very detailed feasibility and analysis, some preliminary design of that particular opportunity or energy conservation measure. And then typically that these things get implemented. They can even get as deep as looking at integrating a cogeneration plant. Let's say your facility uses a lot of energy and also needs hot water or heat. There are opportunities to put in microturbines and generate electricity and heat from those. And oftentimes we do have, after we've done all we can to improve energy efficiency in a building, we will look at renewable energy opportunities. Sometimes companies have goals to be using all their electricity or energy from renewable sources, and some people want to put solar panels on a building or put wind turbines up, and we can definitely look at those as well. Energy conservation measures, I can tell you the most effective and best energy conservation measure is off. If you can turn something off, that's really great. It's usually very low cost. It's really surprising though if you just drive around sometime when you're in your travels and look at buildings at night. You'll go by a series of office buildings and you'll see there's all the lights are on in the building and there's no cars in the parking lot. So what a huge waste of energy. And think about your own facility. Are you sure the lights are being turned off after the shift leaves, or the building gets shut down for the night or the weekend? Because if not, then you're basically losing money. Looking at lighting, looking at appliances, considering the heating and cooling systems, domestic hot water, building envelope and weatherization. That's a component that's really hard to address, but we do often see that there are opportunities. And many of you that are in long-term leases, you are going to have situations where the roof on your building might need to be replaced at some point, and that's a perfect opportunity when you're putting a new roof on to add more insulation into the roof. There's a little bit of cost to that, but we found that a lot of utilities offer incentives there, and by adding that extra insulation, number one, it makes the building more comfortable, but if you're in a building that has to be cooled or heated over time, it's going to really reduce your energy consumption because heat rises, and we know that putting more insulation in a roof has great value. I mentioned earlier about implementing and optimizing building scheduling and controls. In these pictures, this is a simple timer that can be shut up that can be installed that basically will shut off lights or HVAC equipment. Another area that most people don't realize, exhaust fans. We find a lot of buildings where the exhaust fans are left on all the time. Putting in a timer or something like that to handle that is really good. If you do have a building automation system, this is an example of setting up a schedule for, say, lighting or HVAC start. And we often find that people will be running equipment when there's no people in the building. And, as silly as it sounds, it happens all the time. And a lot of times the property owners, the folks at Liberty, maybe their lease requires that they provide heating and cooling at certain times. You might have a building engineer running that building, and they just automatically run the HVAC on a weekend when nobody's even there. So we see that often. But for those of you that are responsible for managing your own operations, think about that. Make sure that things are turned off when nobody's there. Also, exterior lighting. Most exterior lighting will have some type of controls to sense when it's dark or daylight. But there are a lot of times you'll drive by buildings and you see the exterior lights, the parking lot lights, or the building perimeter lights are all on. That's just really a scheduling thing. So again, important to look at that. I mentioned earlier preventative maintenance, how integral and important it is to not only optimizing equipment performance, but saving energy and water, reducing waste, improving indoor air quality, all really important aspects. If you do have equipment within your building, it is important to follow recommended maintenance schedules. I mentioned earlier, some of you may actually have compressed air systems in your buildings. Huge opportunity there. We always find leaks. As you can see in this picture, here's a guy doing some leak detection on a air system. But over time, these usually a lot of piping, usually a lot of equipment, and leaks do develop. And Most people don't notice them, but that's the silent, what do they call that, the vampire loads that are stealing energy from you. And then having comprehensive policies and programs for preventative maintenance is really important and key to maintaining good performance in the building. Mentioned lighting before, and actually I'm going to talk about some examples of that when we do a case study, but there's so much technology that's advancing, it's hard to even keep up right now. In the world of fluorescence, there's now T5 lamps, there's T8s. They all have much longer life, they have lower mercury in them, and they have very good lumen outputs even in the lower wattage lamps. So things that you have to consider, if you are looking to do a lighting upgrade, it's really important to do a good lighting study or a lighting audit, and we always include data logging equipment. We'll put sensors throughout the building, and we want to know not only when the space is occupied, but are the lights really going off when they're supposed to. So we'll typically install these data loggers for up to 2 weeks, collect them, and then that gives us information on the various spaces. If you are working in your industrial building, you will have office spaces. We'd monitor them. If you have, say, meeting rooms, if you have warehouse that is oftentimes unoccupied, we'll want to know that. And by understanding that data, we can really put together an effective strategy for both occupancy sensors as well as the best lighting choices. We typically look at maintaining lighting power densities at certain levels. For high bay warehouses, we typically look at 0.58 watts per square foot. For activities that require, say you're doing some assembly of equipment, or you're basically an operation that's fulfilling orders where you're picking things off shelves and doing packaging, it's important to have better lighting. We'll typically look at a target of 0.95 watts per square foot. Lighting power densities, typically if you have an electrician just come in and put in lighting, they're not even going to consider that. It's really important to do some type of engineering analysis to know what your best lighting densities are by the space type. I did mention earlier there's such a myriad of opportunities. Right now I was just worked in a facility recently, and because the utility rebates are really good, the industrial warehouse spaces are actually integrating LEDs now. And these LED lights for a long time have been very expensive. They still are, but with the right incentives they make great sense. We've been using a lot of high bay fixtures that include T5s or T8s. The new vintage lamps have much longer life, so maintenance is not as bad, and you don't have to worry about replacing lamps as much. And there's even a technology now where you can, if you really need the lighting of a metal halide, they make a product called Smart Pod that can be added onto existing metal halides that allows you to control these fixtures. Always allows you also to do dimming and different things like that, which isn't typically available with a typical metal halide. So some pretty good technology out there. Mentioned lighting controls. Basically, occupancy sensors are very important. However, if you have a building that's got daylighting, daylight sensors are really effective too. I mentioned earlier about exterior lighting being left on. Having photocells or some other means of detecting when it's dark or when it's light is really important because the seasons change. So typically a photocell is a better option than a timer. But just pay attention. You'll oftentimes see many warehouse buildings or industrial buildings with the outdoor lighting on even during the day. I mentioned daylighting, and that daylighting is a really great tool that we use in many buildings. It doesn't have to only be done in new construction. I mentioned earlier when you're going to be replacing a roof on a building, it's a great time to not only add insulation, but you can also put in these tubular daylight devices. That different companies like Solitude or Velux make these, and these have proven to be really great. Number one, they create really nice light. I'll talk about a case study in a little bit where we actually integrated these into the building, and they have a measurable improvement in productivity in that space because of the daylighting. So again, it's definitely a cost to this, but there will be not only energy savings, but definitely improvements in the working conditions for the people that are in the spaces. I mentioned de-stratification earlier. Since we're talking industrial and warehouse space, you definitely are going to have high bay situations. And like I said, during heating season, all that heat's up at the top of near the roof. During cooling season, being able to move air around the space definitely improves the comfort of the space and can even eliminate the need for air conditioning. I would imagine that many of your buildings aren't air conditioned if it is a warehouse or even light industrial. So, how do you go about improving comfort? Well, there's various things you can do. You can install fans. Like this is actually a big ass fan. You may have seen these before, and that's the real name of the company. And these big propeller fans actually do a really good job of moving air. This is a building that we recently worked in where we had these installed, and it worked out really well. They even make these little, it's a fan, but it's kind of set up with a nozzle. So unlike a typical ceiling fan, this does a really great job of propelling the air well down to the floor and getting the air away from the ceiling. So great things to consider when you're thinking about de-stratification for improving comfort as well as maybe reducing cooling costs. I mentioned ventilation before, and this device over here is a great device that we've used on many buildings. It's actually a four-way fan. This device allows us to basically program this or set it up that it can draw air into the building. So let's say that we have a situation where we have a space that we want, there's conditions in the evening or at night or certain times of year we want to bring in and do free cooling. This fan actually allows us to bring that air in to the building, or you can reverse the fans and you can exhaust air out, or you can use this to basically just move air within the space without any ventilation, or you can just run this fan and bring in a small percentage of outside air and ventilate that way. So really good opportunity there for reducing mechanical cooling, also providing comfort and improvement. These have a pretty good cost, but the payback is pretty quick if you can turn off air conditioning and do other things with it. Ventilation is really important also for maintaining occupant comfort. Since we're talking about industrial buildings, I would think maybe some of you may, if you're doing any kind of manufacturing or assembly or painting or different things like that, you may have issues where you have to meet various OSHA standards, and ventilation helps with that as well. It's important also that you want to ventilate to maintain good indoor comfort, but we don't want to over-ventilate a building because there's a cost to that. Let's say you do have an office section in your warehouse or industrial building. By code, you're required to bring in fresh air, and you're going to have to definitely make sure you're doing, meeting code. But if you are bringing in more outside air than you need, you're going to be, there's a cost to condition that air. If you're in a laboratory setting, you're exhausting a lot of air. There's a cost for that. So a lot of things have to be evaluated when it comes to ventilation. I mentioned waste heat recovery. This is actually a building we worked on. Right behind this wall are the air compressors, and we were able to collect all the waste heat recovery. This is a building that's in Northern Climate Zone, Climate Zone 4, and basically they had a very high heating load on this building. So we were able to capture all the waste heat off of the air compressors. You can see here we have some louvers on this ductwork. And notice the ductwork goes through the wall. We're actually feeding that waste heat into 2 or 3 other spaces in the building. And by doing this, we're able to shut off the natural gas to heat this space by collecting the waste heat right off of the air compressors. You can do the same thing with boilers. There could be process equipment. There could be dryers that you use in your facility. A lot of opportunity to collect that information or collect that waste heat and utilize it for other things. It doesn't just have to be building heating either. It can also be used for maybe a drying application, or if you're preheating materials or something like that. I mentioned earlier high-speed roll-up doors. Again, the amount of time that a door is open is going to affect the amount of air exchanges within the building, and the quicker you do it, the better. So these high-speed roll-up doors not only minimize the amount of infiltration or exfiltration, but they also can be designed to have insulation in them, so you're adding, improving the building envelope. And we've seen a lot of activity, if you're in a warehouse space, many of you know, as the trucks are backing up and you're loading or unloading these trucks, there is going to be a lot of air moving in and out of there. So, maybe you want to isolate your truck bay by using doors like this, and the forklifts can just come in and out of the warehouse and still keep the truck bay isolated. So different things you can consider there. I mentioned earlier energy curtailment. I would imagine, since we're talking about industrial or manufacturing or warehouse buildings, many of you are going to have forklifts you're using. If they're electric, you want to basically consider maybe when you charge your forklift batteries. You can do that on off-peak times and actually save some money for that. Or if you are an operation that has a large generator, you can do a thing called demand response, where if the electric utility hits a period, like say in the hot summer, where they need to reduce load, they'll notify you guys through electronic means, have you reduce your load, and then you can start your generator and use that to provide power for your building, or you can put power out on the grid, or you can even just reduce your load and basically get paid for that. So that energy curtailment is a really big opportunity these days, and it's getting a lot of attention because many utilities don't have the ability to build power plants and meet that need. A couple other things I want to talk about as far as additional things you can do to green your building. Really important to establish a sustainable operations program. I mentioned benchmarking, but then setting goals based on that, maybe having a facility green team, developing a plan and goals with different activities you want to do to improve performance, and then holding accountable. That means basically doing moving forward with the goals and making sure people are actually working towards them and implementing them. So establishing a firm sustainability or greening program is really a good step to improving your operations, and this will be very effective in saving money, because just using technology or changing light bulbs is not going to be the only thing you can do. You're going to often have situations where you got to change people's behavior, and the more people you get involved, the better. We've actually done training in many industrial and warehouse buildings for the folks that work there, to give them ideas on things they can do to save energy that is well beyond just equipment changes. I mentioned earlier water savings. If any of you have areas where you're managing water, I would imagine just about every building is going to have at least restrooms, but some may have showers. You definitely want to look at using low-flow aerators. They're very inexpensive. You can put them on any faucet. You can go to low-flush toilets. You can even get a retrofit for many toilets to go to dual flush, which without having to change the fixture itself, just the valves. We often recommend on urinals, very easy to change. If you have a 1.0 gallon per flush urinal, it's very easy to replace the valve guts for about $10 to $15. That'll allow you to go down to half a gallon per flush, and they still work very effectively. Low flow shower heads, that's an area you're going to save not only water, but you're also going to save hot water. We often look at water heaters going to high efficiency gas or tankless water heaters, sometimes solar. And like I said, by saving water, you're also going to save energy to heat that water, so you get the double benefit of that. And they're very low cost things that can be done. I mentioned earlier about establishing a sustainability program. These are just the various steps that typically you can utilize. Number one, you want management commitment. You form a sustainability team. You'll educate them. You'll collect data and benchmark your operations. You establish your goals. You basically identify the opportunities. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at energy conservation measures, do energy efficiency audit, and then you implement. You measure, report your performance, and then as you achieve them, as technology gets better or markets change, you develop your next set of generation or next set of sustainability goals. Then you repeat the process. So let's take a quick minute before we get into questions and just talk about a case study really quick. I showed you this space earlier. Remember, we saw the waste heat recovery, but I also want to point out a few other things that we did in this space. This was a building that we basically raised the roof and did some work in this space because it was going to be a new manufacturing area. And this is prior to getting all the equipment in here, but what we did is we used all high bay lighting here, T5 lighting, very long life fluorescent bulbs. And then you'll see in here also these round daylit circles. These are actually the tubular daylight devices. And the only reason I show this picture is because I want to show you that you can notice here, that's during the day this photograph was taken. You can see this has the same brightness as the actual electric fixture. There's actually daylight sensors that measure the amount of light coming in from these tubular daylight devices, which are spaced to perfectly light this whole floor to the lighting power density that we desire, and these electric lights will turn off. We have found that this space is up and operating right now. There's quite a few people that work in here, and there's actually a waiting list of people that want to work in this space because of the daylighting. The space just has such a good feel. You've probably been in buildings with no windows before, and you don't know if it's daylight, you don't know if it's raining, you don't know if it's cloudy, sunny. By having this daylight, it's basically affects us, people's natural biorhythms, and they found that the people actually working in this space have less absenteeism. They call in, they don't call in sick as much, and there is a waiting list of people that want to move to this department right now. Other thing we did, it's hard to see here, but there are ventilation fans up here in this picture. We just use standard ceiling fans for de-stratification. We also used in here recycled content materials. We use low VOC paints and things like that to really improve the performance. We also did a white roof on here, and we also added additional roof insulation when the roof was replaced. It's hard to see over here, but there's a rectangle. That's actually the four-way fan. There's one right here and right here. And we do actually have that program for night cooling in the right conditions, or even cooling when outdoor conditions are right, to keep the occupants' comfort as well as for ventilation. This is an example of some other buildings we worked on. This is just some typical savings that we've quantified. We've been in a number of facilities where they have programmable thermostats, but they don't have them programmed. So by integrating those and programming them, there's actually an opportunity to save money. For this particular building, it came out to about almost $800 a year immediate payback just by doing the programming. You can see here some of the savings that could be realized from installing low-flow water fixtures. For example, we have a $470 investment for this building, but about $870 in savings in 1 year, half a year payback. Just repairing compressed air leaks. Initial investment about $11,000 to fix the leaks, but almost $20,000 a year in savings. And then installing occupancy sensors, about $5,000 in cost to implement, $6,000 in savings annually, 0.8-year payback. I mentioned earlier about the ability to measure and understand how energy is used in the building. You can see here, here's a typical pie chart we would develop, and if we have submetering data, great, we can do that with data loggers, but usually we'll even do this by estimating, where we'll basically understand the loads on the air compressors, the lighting, the blowers that are used in the building, their radiant heating, HVAC. Really important to understand that, and once you do that, it allows us to really focus in on the areas where we can save energy, and these are all simple things that can be done. You can see in here, this is some warehouse spaces that we identified where they had both metal halide as well as fluorescent lighting fixtures. We did work to upgrade these spaces, and basically now we integrated throughout the high bay fluorescents with occupancy sensors, and that has realized about a 18% savings in energy for this particular building, resulted in a savings about $30,000 a year, and they were able to utilize that money for other things, research and development, some upgrades for some of their equipment, and things like that. So the savings is really important, and works out really well. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to Marla and let her talk about the Liberty Energy Efficiency Partnership Program, and then we're going to take questions. So Marla, if you want to jump in.
Okay, great. I'll be really quick because we're actually out of time, but we're going to just do this really quickly here. I wanted to let you know, some of you may have heard of this already, or some of you actually may even be a part of it, but we have a program called LEEP, which stands for Liberty Energy Efficiency Partnership Program. And what we're doing here is we're just offering, Tad was telling you about benchmarking using the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. We're big Energy Star partners. We've been Partner of the Year for 2 years in a row. And that's because we've really seen the value that that benchmark provides, and we've benchmarked all of our managed buildings. And so we thought that it made sense for us to help our industrial tenants if you have any interest. What we can do is together we can benchmark if we can get access to your utility data, and everything is confidential, of course. Then what we'll do is we'll track and benchmark for you and send you reports that help show you that trending over time, especially if you make changes. Next steps, if you are interested, just let your Liberty property manager know, and then we'd be happy to give you more information. And then we will need access to utility usage, and sometimes this can be a barrier, but we're really working hard all across the country with utilities to sort of get past this, because we really, want to make it as simple as possible for you. So really, if you sign one thing once, then all you have to do then is let us give you good information from there. And if you get, if we get your building scoring over 75, we will be happy to certify that for Energy Star for you, so then you can get some benefits out of that and some marketing. So if you're interested in the partnership program, just ask your Liberty property manager, and they will be more than happy to give.
Okay. Hello, Marla. Marla, I think we lost you.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. We lost you there. Okay, thank you, Marla. Again, I know that was a lot of information to cover. We do have a few minutes for questions, and I do have one here that came in, and I'll quickly address this. And then, Marla, I think we'll do the drawing since we are getting short on time here. So let me look here. Okay, the first question I have is, what can I do to prepare for an energy audit in my building? And basically what I'd recommend people do is get your utility bills together. You definitely get together information that will allow us to come in. We want to understand your equipment that's being utilized, your process, the number of people. So having the data ready will be really important for us to do that. I got one other question here. What are some of the benefits of a LEED certified building? The benefits of LEED certification are, number one, it's going to have an established program for you to develop a performance improvement program, and it's also really good for marketing and different things like that. And let's see, I want to make sure I get all these. All right, and I just had one more here. What type of lighting tends to be the best for a high bay warehouse application? Like I mentioned earlier, I do like the fluorescent lighting with the high bay fixtures and the occupancy sensors. That tends to work out really well. All right, Marla, we're going to quickly do the energy drawing here for the folks that are on. And I had someone here in the office. We put the names in a hat for everybody that attended. And the winner is Austin Heilig from, Austin Heilig's the winner. So Marla, you can definitely work on contacting them, and we can work on coordinating that and setting it up.
Yes, that's great. Congratulations, Austin. Hope you're still on, and we'll be getting in touch with you so we can get you set up for your audit.
All right, so this ends this session. I definitely appreciate everybody's time, and again, if there's any questions or different things you have, you can definitely reach out to Liberty folks and get these questions answered. Just in conclusion, measurement and benchmarking is really important. Definitely want to evaluate our opportunities that are simple and provide quick cost savings. And these audits are definitely going to help to improve your operations and save money. So again, thank you all. And Marla, thank you very much for hosting this and putting this on. I think it's very valuable for your tenants.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for attending today.